Well, I'm back to finish this nonsense I started. So, hello again, everyone. Hope you've all been doing well. Nice to see you. Chimity, how's it going? Looking great. Nice to see you. Keep it up. You're doing a great job. So, this will be the continuation of my last video on the Battle of the Scheldt Estuary. Hope you enjoyed the last one. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you do so, as it will inform this one. So, without further ado, let's get this started. As the main portion of Antwerp had been captured earlier in September 1944, Allied troops had successfully taken major parts of the city. However, some suburbs of Antwerp still remained in German hands. Since September 17th, elements of the 2nd Canadian Division had been stationed at Antwerp, positioning themselves along the Albert Canal, the northernmost bank, which was still in the hands of the Germans. The city was a hub of death, with the constant threat of German V-1 bombs, German snipers, and German infiltrators dressed in civilian clothing who tried to gather intelligence and take prisoners back for interrogations. V-1 and V-2 bombs were a constant threat, with multiple salvos being sent to the city. Layers of mobile anti-air defenses were constantly being set up and moved in the surrounding area. Reoccurring orders to reposition were given to AA crews in order to maintain an adequate level of defensive anti-air fire. Frontline observers were key in relaying incoming V-1 bombs to Allied Air Command, as constant repositioning to the correct area was necessary in order to maintain high levels of firepower to prevent further destruction of the city. Now, even though the southern shore of the Scheldt Estuary had been cleared, the Germans still occupied the northern shore, sitting in heavily fortified positions. On October the 2nd, 1944, the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division advanced north from Antwerp, clearing the weakly defended suburbs of Merksem. As the advance continued north, the Canadians ran into stiffer resistance in the town of Putte on the Belgian-Dutch border. Tasked to be cleared out by the Canadian Essex Scottish Regiment, the town was initially taken, only to be lost by a German counterattack. Not secured until the late evening, the company had suffered heavy casualties, losing some 125 men with 12 killed, 2/3 of its force. The capture of Putte was still, however, a milestone, as it marked the advance of the Allied armies into the Netherlands. With the advancing Allies now jeopardizing the German positions, and having anticipated the Allied advance into the Beveland Isthmus, the Germans quickly reinforced their positions. Deploying Kampfgruppe Chill, a 2,500 to 3,000 strong paratrooper regiment, was assembled with remnants of the German 84th, 85th, and 89th Infantry Divisions. They were fielded with dozens of 88mm flak cannons as they began to entrench themselves. Commanded by Lieutenant General Kurt Chill, an experienced commander who was in charge of the 85th Infantry Division, had previously commanded the 122nd through Russia in 1942. The Germans concentrated much of their forces to the Dutch city of Woensdrecht, which guarded the entry point to the Beveland Peninsula. As the 2nd Canadian Division and the 5th Canadian Brigade began to approach Woensdrecht, they encountered increasingly fierce resistance. For 3 weeks, the Germans held their positions as the advancing Canadians were forced to advance over open, wet, and soggy ground. The Germans held the high ground both atop the dikes and situated on a ridge around Woensdrecht, and were able to observe all of the Canadian movements. On October the 13th, the Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, also known as the Black Watch, attempted to seize a dike north of Woensdrecht nicknamed the Coffin. Although they were supported by 3 artillery regiments, smoke shells, flamethrowers, anti-tank guns, and air support, the attack ended in total disaster. As the Black Watch advanced through sodden muddy fields, entrenched and camouflaged Fallschirmjäger utterly annihilated them. The battalion lost 145 men, all of the company commanders, and in one infantry company, 4 men were left standing out of the 90 that advanced. On October 16th, the final attack on Woensdrecht was issued. Seeing a heavily supported night attack on the city, the task fell to the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry. Commanded by a Dieppe veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Whitaker, the attack went surprisingly well until the inevitable counterattack. The counterattack began overrunning C Company's position, and the company commander, Major Joe Pigot, called for an artillery strike on his own position. The Canadians, having received advance word of the incoming artillery, hid in the Germans' former slit trenches. The Germans were caught totally in the open, as 4,000 high-explosive shells rained down on them. The city had been captured, however, the entry point into the peninsula was not secured until the 24th of October. Still, the regiment had suffered for its success, seeing only 6 officers and 157 men left standing after the battle. The battle was now nearing its final phases, now seeing the 4th Canadian Armoured Brigade advance toward Bergen-op-Zoom. Hearing rumors that the city had been left abandoned by the Germans, the Canadians took a gamble and headed straight for it. Their luck had paid off. Only the northern suburbs of Bergen-op-Zoom were actually occupied by the Germans, but was still not secured until 2 days later on October the 29th. Operation Vitality saw the 2nd Canadian Division beginning to advance into South Beveland. However, mud, mines, and entrenched enemies stopped the advance. The Germans had created a defensive line behind the Beveland Canal, which bisected the peninsula. This proved to be a major obstacle and resulted in help being required from the British 52nd Lowland Division. The 52nd landed behind the Beveland Canal in an amphibious assault, causing chaos behind enemy lines, proved the right opportunity for the 6th Canadian Brigade to advance in assault boats. Once a foothold was established, the Germans retreated to Walcheren Island. Ultimately, the end goal of all the advances were to get to this point, as it represented the greatest threat to Allied shipping trying to reach Antwerp. Given that Walcheren Island was part of the Atlantic Wall, heavy coastal batteries were emplaced around its edges. Capturing Walcheren Island would, however, be extremely difficult. A defensive perimeter had been established, and the coastal towns with naval gun batteries were all heavily defended. Not to forget that the only land-bearing structure connecting Walcheren Island to the mainland was a narrow causeway, 1,000 meters long and 45 meters wide, with nothing but a sea of mud on either side. To add to the troubles of the Canadians and now the British, earlier bombing runs on the island's dikes had flooded much of the island. Conducted in order to prevent further German entrenchment, the bombings had succeeded in the sense where it isolated the defenders, but forced them to seek the high ground. Titled Operation Infatuate, attacks on the causeway began on the 31st of October with the Black Watch, its ranks now swelling with reinforcements. However, regimental morale was low and they failed to capture the causeway. Following their attack was then the Calgary Highlanders, who also failed to cross successfully. The Calgary Highlanders tried again the next day on November the 1st. However, even though they managed to cross and gain a foothold, were repelled by heavy German counterattacks, including the deployment of German flamethrowers. The causeway was eventually crossed on November the 2nd due to the sheer determination of a battalion of French-Canadian Régiment de Maisonneuve. Coming under friendly fire and German mortar attacks, they miraculously made it across. As the Canadian assault was ongoing, British reconnaissance parties had found an opening into Walcheren through the mudflats. British commandos had started to land on Walcheren on November the 1st, landing southeast of Vlissingen, seeing heavy street fighting. Heavy casualties were seen here due to the heavy German gun emplacements, destroying not only the ships supporting the British, but also their landing craft and the British soldiers on the ground. After the last occupied town of Middelburg was liberated on November the 6th, 1944, the island had been secured, and fighting ended on the island altogether on November the 8th. The Scheldt River was then swept and cleared of mines, and the first Allied convoys began streaming into Antwerp on November the 28th, 1944. It is fitting now to state that this series was overwhelmingly from a Canadian context, and even though they did a majority of the fighting in this battle, they were not the only Allied actors, as British, Polish, and United States forces also took place in the fighting. At the end of the battle, the Allies had suffered over 12,000 casualties, half of them being Canadian. The Germans suffered a heavy defeat, seeing 10,000 to 12,000 battle casualties, and roughly 40,000 men captured. It is also important to recognize the overall context of where this battle fit within the Western European conflict. This battle was ongoing as the colossal failure of Market Garden was underway. Additionally, the Germans, recognizing the strategic importance of Antwerp to the Allied war effort, continued to send constant V-1 and V-2 sorties to disrupt Allied supply movements after the port had opened. Also to note, the capture of the city of Antwerp was the main goal of the German army during their winter 1944 Ardennes offensive, which, if it was successful, would have greatly changed the strategic standing of the Allies in Europe. Before I close this episode, I wanted to include one more historical detail. As Allied shipping began to stream in, it brought with it a surprising commodity: bells. Many bells in church towers and city centers were seized by the Nazis to be melted down for relevant war metal. The delivery of bells from the Allies acted as a wondrous symbol, where acting as sounds of freedom, liberation, and hope could be echoed across an entire city, inspiring the people to a return to normality, people who had been scared, violated, and oppressed for so long. I'd just like to thank everyone for watching. I know it took me a while to get this second part out, actually almost a year, but it's not my primary focus or anything. I really just do this as like a hobby. If you want me to do any video on a particular subject, please let me know in the comments below. I've been considering doing a video on the Canadian defense of Hong Kong, or maybe the Canadian role in closing the Falaise pocket, but haven't really determined which one I want to do yet. And of course, if you liked this video, please like the video and consider subscribing to my channel. Maybe I'll have a video out in almost another year. Anyway, thank you very much for watching.